Random House Audio presents One Shot, a Jack Reacher novel by Lee Child, read for you by Dick Hill. Chapter 1. Friday, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Maybe the hardest time to move unobserved through a city, or maybe the easiest, because at 5 o'clock on a Friday, nobody pays attention to anything except the road ahead. The man with the rifle drove north. Not fast, not slow, not drawing attention, not standing out. He was in a light-colored minivan that had seen better days. He was alone behind the wheel. He was wearing a light-colored raincoat and the kind of shapeless, light-colored beanie hat that old guys wear on the golf course when the sun is out or the rain is falling. The hat had a two-tone red band all around it. It was pulled down low. The coat was buttoned up high. The man was wearing sunglasses, even though the van had dark windows and the sky was cloudy. And he was wearing gloves, even though winter was 3 months away, and the weather wasn't cold. Traffic slowed to a crawl where First Street started up a hill. Then it stopped completely, where 2 lanes became one because the blacktop was torn up for construction. There was construction all over town. Driving had been a nightmare for a year. Holes in the road, gravel trucks, concrete trucks, blacktop spreaders. The man with the rifle lifted his hand off the wheel, pulled back his cuff, checked his watch. 11 minutes. Be patient. He took his foot off the brake and crawled ahead. Then he stopped again where the roadway narrowed and the sidewalks widened where the downtown shopping district started. There were big stores to the left and the right, each one set a little higher than the last, because of the hill. The wide sidewalks gave plenty of space for shoppers to stroll. There were cast-iron flagpoles and cast-iron lampposts, all lined up like sentries between the people and the cars. The people had more space than the cars. Traffic was very slow. He checked his watch again. 8 minutes. Be patient. 100 yards later, the prosperity faded a little. The congestion eased. First Street opened out and became slightly shabby again. There were bars and dollar stores. Then a parking garage on the left. Then yet more construction where the parking garage was being extended. Then, farther ahead, the street was blocked by a low wall. Behind it was a windy pedestrian plaza with an ornamental pool and a fountain. On the plaza's left, the old city library. On its right, a new office building. Behind it, a black glass tower. First Street turned an abrupt right angle in front of the plaza's boundary wall and ran away west, past untidy rear entrances and loading docks, and then on under the raised state highway. But the man in the minivan slowed before he hit the turn in front of the plaza and made a left and entered the parking garage. He drove straight up the ramp. There was no barrier, because each slot had its own parking meter. Therefore, there was no cashier, no witness, no ticket, no paper trail. The man in the minivan knew all that. He wound around the ramps to the second level and headed for the far back corner of the structure, left the van idling in the aisle for a moment, and slipped out of the seat and moved an orange traffic cone from the slot he wanted. It was the last one in the old part of the building, right next to where the new part was being added on. He drove the van into the slot and shut it down, sat still for a moment. The garage was quiet. It was completely full with silent cars. The slot he had protected with a traffic cone had been the last one available. The garage was always packed. He knew that. That was why they were extending it. They were doubling its size. It was used by shoppers. That was why it was quiet. Nobody in their right mind would try to leave at 5 o'clock. Not into the rush hour traffic, not with the construction delays. Either they would get out by 4 or wait until 6. The man in the minivan checked his watch. 4 minutes. Easy. He opened the driver's door and slid out, took a quarter from his pocket and put it in the meter, twisted the handle hard and heard the coin fall, and saw the clockwork give him an hour in exchange. There was no other sound, nothing in the air except the smell of parked automobiles, gasoline, rubber, cold exhaust. He stood still next to the van. On his feet he had a pair of old desert boots, khaki suede, single eyelets, white crepe soles, made by Clark's of England, much favored by Special Forces soldiers. An iconic design, unchanged in maybe 60 years. He glanced back at the parking meter. 59 minutes. He wouldn't need 59 minutes. He opened the minivan's sliding rear door and leaned inside and unfolded a blanket and revealed the rifle. It was a Springfield M1A Supermatch autoloader, American walnut stock, heavy premium barrel, 10-shot box magazine chambered for the .308. It was the exact commercial equivalent of the M14 self-loading sniper rifle that the American military had used during his long-ago years in the service. It was a fine weapon, maybe not quite as accurate with the first cold shot as a top-of-the-line bolt gun, but it would do. It would do just fine. He wasn't going to be looking at extraordinary distances. It was loaded with Lake City M852s, his favorite custom cartridges, special Lake City match brass, Federal powder, Sierra Match King 168-grain hollow point boat tail bullets. The load was better than the gun, probably. A slight mismatch. He listened to the silence and lifted the rifle off the rear bench, carried it away with him to where the old part of the garage finished and the new part began. There was a half-inch trench between the old concrete and the new, like a demarcation line. He guessed it was an expansion joint for the summer heat. He guessed they were going to fill it with soft tar. Directly above it there was yellow and black "Caution, do not enter" tape strung between two pillars. He dropped to one knee and slid under it, stood up again and walked on into the raw, new construction. Parts of the new concrete floor were troweled smooth, and parts were rough, still waiting for the final surface. There were wooden planks laid here and there as walkways. There were haphazard piles of paper cement sacks, some full, some empty. There were more open expansion joints. There were strings of bare light bulbs, turned off, empty wheelbarrows, crushed soda cans, spools of cable, unexplained lengths of lumber, piles of crushed stone, silent concrete mixers. There was gray cement dust everywhere, as fine as talc, and the smell of damp lime. The man with the rifle walked on in the darkness until he came close to the new northeast corner. Then he stopped and put his back tight against a raw concrete pillar and stood still. Inched to his right with his head turned until he could see where he was. He was about 8 feet from the garage's new perimeter wall, looking due north. The wall was about waist high. It was unfinished. It had bolts cast into it to take lengths of metal barrier to stop cars hitting the concrete. There were receptacles cast into the floor to take the new parking meter posts. The man with the rifle inched forward and turned a little until he felt the corner of the pillar between his shoulder blades. He turned his head again. Now he was looking north and east, directly into the public plaza. The ornamental pool was a long, narrow rectangle running away from him.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?